Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. In today's episode, I speak with Kim Sturgess. She's a CEO and founder of WaterSMART. She's going to talk to us about the difference between managing your water in a drought situation versus a flood situation. So stay tuned. Hi, Kim. How are you today?
Good. Thank you very much.
So before we get started on our topic related to water, can you just tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I became really interested in water. I am a water person. I think water people are born. I grew up around oceans and rivers and lakes, so had a big passion for it. My training is actually, I'm an engineer. I graduated from engineering physics from Queen's University. And so most of my career was involved in developing, industrial products, working on pipelines, quite tangible engineering work. But in around 2004, I got very interested in the idea of water and water for sustainable economy. We'd been working on it. My team and I had been working on another business that involved water, and I just got the urge to do something more creative and positive around water that would support water for a sustainable economy. So that really was the focus of that effort to start. And we actually launched in about 2005, and we've been going ever since.
Well, now that you explained you were going to Queens in the Kingston area with all the cottage country, I get your passion for water. As a prairie girl, It was always foreign to me, needing to live by water, but I totally get it, given where you spent a lot of time. So tell me about WaterSMART. What exactly is it? Is it a company? Is it a nonprofit? What is WaterSMART?
So we started originally as a not-for-profit under the Alberta Societies Act, and we operated. We had a consulting arm, and then we had an education arm. And so the water education and awareness is through the Alberta Water Portal, albertawater.com. So anything you want to know about water, floods, droughts, anything, you can go on to albertawater.com, and that's our now charity. We split the two, and the water portal is now registered charity, doing great work on things like water nexus, water energy food nexus. WaterSMART Solutions is the advisory services business on water matters. We've been involved with policy work with the government of both levels of government, all three levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. We work with companies on their water strategies and the implementation of those strategies. We're doing a lot more work now on water metrics and reporting in support of ESG, which is a big deal. Helping companies with water licensing, water sourcing strategies, things like that. And I think the biggest thing we do is we do a lot of work with collaboratives. So groups of people focused on solving common issues around water management. So that's a lot of our collaborative watershed work, which I think is the basis of the flood and drought pieces that we're going to discuss. So that's what we do. We have engineers and environmental scientists, people that are really good facilitators and collaboration specialists. Great board of advisors, great special advisors, and a wonderful team.
That's great. And the need is great, I think, for that kind of talent, because when you look at the natural disasters that have even more recently occurred, whether it's drought, whether it's flooding, this kind of thing is something communities are increasingly going to have to grapple with. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, if a community is watching this, is there a difference between what you should be looking at from a flood perspective versus a drought perspective, or is it just basically you need to manage your water no matter what?
Well, you have to manage water no matter what. So the interesting part of this is, although Canada is viewed as being awash in water, having lots of it, and we have about 20% of the freestanding water in the world, about 7% of the recurring water. In other words, it's annualized over the year. That's how much it refreshes every year. About 7% is what we can take out without damaging the system or drawing it down. But here in Alberta, we have only about 2% of the water, and most of that, 80% of that water, is in the north, and 80% of the use is in the south. So these are pretty standard numbers that people know. But in southern Alberta, we are constrained in our growth, economic growth, by access to water. So here it's absolutely vital that we manage our water resources all the time, not just for natural disasters, but all the time. It's really important to be able to manage our resources and do it in a collaborative way that allows people to that allows for sharing and optimizing the use of the resource.
So what is some of the challenge that you think communities face, or that communities face, when it comes to managing their water resources?
Access, really. So in Alberta, as in many jurisdictions, the water is managed. In Alberta, water is owned by it's a natural resource, so it's owned by the people and managed by the government on behalf of the people. So in order to use water, you need to get licensed. You need to actually apply for a water license from the government and be granted that license. So it's on a senior priority basis. So if you have a water license from, for example, the irrigation districts from 1907, then you are entitled to that amount of water first, and then everybody goes in sequence up until the date of the last license that was issued. In other words, if there's a shortage, the last guy in is cut off first. That's how it works. Now, that's how it works legally. Now, in practice, people tend to be more collaborative and cooperative than that. So, for example, in the 2000, 2001, 2002 drought, there was some really innovative approaches to water sharing. So the more senior holders were able to share some of their water with some of the more junior people to make sure the whole community stayed strong and was able to push through. And that was the most stress that the system had been under in recent times. And then the other thing that's happened in 2006 is that in the South Saskatchewan Basin, which is where I live in Calgary, on the Bow River system, and that system and the Old Man River system and the South Saskatchewan were all put under an order that said that there would be no more applications accepted for water licenses in southern Alberta in those basins. So since then, that's put a lot more limitation on access to water in the south. So what does that mean for communities? Well, if you think about how much Calgary has grown over the last 40 years, or not 50 years, it's grown quite significantly, and the communities on outside. And right now, several of those communities, their growth is limited by their access to water and water rights. So what does that mean for the community? So it means they've got to, figure out other ways to better lever up their water resources, or they've got to access that water from other sources. So transfer a water license from, say, an old agricultural a farm that is not using it anymore. They could try that. Or what we have seen happening is the city of Calgary saying, well, we'll pipe our water out to you and ship the sewage back, but you're going to pay us for that. Yeah. And so there's all sorts of creative things going on in terms of overall access. But it all comes down to, if we look at it on a system basis, there'll be floods, there'll be droughts, there'll be some growth, and and especially with climate change now becoming more, climate change is now and is going to continue to impact the availability of the water, not just overall volumes, but also the time of year when the water comes. So, looking at this as a system is going to allow for more opportunities to better manage the resource, and and everyone needs to participate in that.
Yeah, no, that's great, because often this is when I'm looking at disasters and how communities are managing their various resources, they look at their forests and how they manage the forest, and I don't know if water has been high on their radar, and I think that increasingly we're going to see this and having to think through how are we going to manage this effectively, because it's from an individual household level all the way up to a business level, right? A business community level. You need access to water. And what does that look like?
Yes, and each person, like there's, each person can make a choice about that's going to make the situation better or worse. If you go on the albertawater.com, the Nexus, there's a project in there called Water Energy Food Nexus, and that's in that society, Alberta Water Portal Society. But that actually has some games, tools, fun things. It's meant for education. That would say, have an individual go on and say, okay, I'm in the Bow Basin, and I want to water my lawn every day. Okay, that my use goes way up. Use goes up on there. Well, that means less food, right? Or less energy. So you can actually go in and say, okay, what are the choices that I can make, that will optimize, given there's only a certain amount of water in the basin, how much, if everybody made these different choices, what impact would that be? And that's very important in the cities, because they're also trying to manage their infrastructure. So it's not just their water licenses for infrastructure, because those are all added in very chunky blocks. So if you have to put in a new water treatment plant, that's a big expense, and it's something you only want to do every 50 years or so. So if that, that's what each individual can do to make a difference.
Obviously you've been in this area for a very long time. Would you say that we're ahead of the game when you look globally as far as our strategies to manage our water? Are we behind or in the middle of the pack? Where would you say, Alberta and Canada would fit when you look globally? Who are the leaders, would you say?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, we get asked to go and speak on what we do all over the world. I think, interestingly enough, Alberta has, up till now, they've done a really good job in terms of managing the water resource and being very sensitive. You don't want a California system, which is sort of, anything under the ground is yours to take. And, they basically depleted their groundwater resources to the point where some places, there's 50 or 60 feet that the ground has dropped down because they pulled the water out from underneath. Wow. There's very strange things, competitive things going on in other parts of the world that make it more complicated. The reason why Alberta, we're kind of at a blessed spot. We are in a blessed spot for many things, but on the water side, we're downstream. We are upstream of everybody, right? So, yeah, right. The only place where we're downstream is on the Peace, where the Site C and those dams are on the Peace, and that's on the British Columbia side. Everywhere else, everything is we're upstream. So the kinds of things that we can be quite creative with the things that we're doing, and I think on both drought and flood, we're working hard to be able to deal with those issues. But it's a lot easier to deal with it when there's nobody upstream making decisions. So, for example, you're asking, I think Alberta is really good going into Saskatchewan. So that's been very interesting because there's an agreement, a boundary treaty agreement between Alberta and Saskatchewan and Saskatchewan and Manitoba to pass 50% of the headwaters flow of that water from Alberta into Saskatchewan, and that's actually enacted. Like, you have to do that. And similarly, 50% to Saskatchewan into Manitoba. Well, so if you're looking at water use in Alberta, 66% of the irrigated land in Canada is in southeastern Alberta, in southern Alberta, and in Saskatchewan, they have a fraction of that. I think it's like 1.3 million irrigated acres versus 55,000 irrigated acres. So, they want to now say, okay, we need to really expand our irrigation because the world needs more food and we're obligated to provide food. I really think that's true. And so how are we going to do that? Well, they have to depend on us, Alberta, to pass them a certain amount of water. So, the work that we all collectively in the basin have been doing for a long time means that, we're really looking to maximize the amount of water that we use on our side, to use our full 50%, right? And if and yet downstream, they're depending on us continuing to put the extra in. We pass about 70% now, so they're kind of counting on that. So it's like, how is Alberta doing? I think Alberta, in the work that we've seen, is doing quite well. Some people, there certainly are glitches, especially between growing communities, municipalities. But they are working hard to try and figure out how to make that work. But for the most part, I think it's actually been done quite well.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for your perspective. Is there anything you want to share that maybe you didn't get a chance to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I think you asked a question about flood and drought, and so I think, just so everybody knows, we're way more likely to have drought issues and challenges, which frankly are way more severe than flood. Flooding is really terrible for the very few people that are flooded. And I think, you can look in the city of Calgary and look where people were impacted and where they weren't. And it's very rough, but it's a smaller concentration. Drought hits everybody.
Yeah. And
so drought is a very long-term issue. Floods, like over years, like 2000, 2001, 2002. Floods happen very quickly. It's very flashy. It's instantaneous. And the whole thing we're trying to do with flood mitigation is take off the peak, pull down the peak so that the flood damage is less. With droughts, you want to make sure that you store water. With floods, you want to make sure you have big empty spaces to store the water so that you can pull down the peak. So it's that tension all the time between storage and empty, so that you can trade off between a flood and a drought. And that's the magic of watershed management.
That is a great way to end, the magic of watershed management. So Kim, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak to me about watershed management. I think it's a critical issue that a lot of communities aren't thinking about as much as they should be. And I will for sure include the links in the video description below on how to access more information about the various reports and resources that you have. So thanks again.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Leanne. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.